All right, guys, welcome back. Excited. Uh, fantastic speaker. But before we jump in, we'll do a quick podcast review. We got a five-star review from Paul 32. So, whoever you are, Paul, thanks for putting a podcast review on Apple for us. It says, great podcast. All men should listen. Guys, if you're a Christian dad or just a guy that wants to learn how to be a better man and leader, check out this podcast. I just listened to episode number 73 with John O'Leary today twice. There was so much good content on that episode. It had at least 10 podcasts worth in one. I plan to replay it a couple more times. It was awesome. Guys, the John O'Leary podcast was a pretty darn cool episode. So I
Mhm.
endorse that one as well. And with that, I'm pretty dang excited to have a guy with us named Davey Blackburn. Davey's got a story that is super crazy, just like John's. I know we'll get into it. And John's got John O'Leary has two best-selling New York Times best-selling books and a movie coming out about his life. And Davey has a book coming out also that I'm super excited to read. I just pre-ordered it a couple minutes ago, so that one comes out
Oh, thanks,
soon.
Dan.
So yeah, you bet. So just a little teaser. So I don't know that I'll do a big intro for Davey other than to say he's got a great story. I've met him, talked to him, and he's got a book coming out, so I'm dying to read that one. And how about you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're right. John O'Leary is incredible. We've had him on our podcast, and an unbelievable, not only just has an unbelievable story, but he also runs an incredible organization. So we've learned a lot of best practices from him, just the organization he runs. So he's a great leader, a great organizational leader as well. So it's really just fantastic that you guys were able to connect with him. Yeah,
Well, maybe since you're talking about him, like
yeah.
throw a little 30-second or 2 minute thing about whatever you want about John.
Well, I think he's extremely inspiring. You know, when you take a story that you don't get to choose what your story is, that's something that we don't get to choose. Life is full of circumstances that occur to us. You know, they happen to it. Life happens to us, you know, and I'm a strong believer. And so I follow God's word. And scripture tells us, Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble. But then he followed it up with, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. And John is an incredible example of someone who has the Spirit of God inside of him, the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, that walks in step with that truth that no matter what kind of trouble we go through, what kind of sorrow we experience, what kind of circumstances befall us, we don't have to be a victim of that circumstance. And you often see people go in one of two directions. You see them kind of wallow in their pain, get defeated, give up, or you see them decide this is not going to define me. This is not going to stifle me. This is not going to get me stuck. And I'm going to partner with God to take back my story. And that's what John has done. And that's what I just admire, you know, how he's walked through life and still has debilitating and crippling pain, but he still continues to move forward with purpose. And that's really what we do at our organization. We help people. Our tagline is help you partner with God to take back your story. And so no matter what you've gone through, we want to help people to be able to partner with the supernatural power of Jesus, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead, to rise above their circumstances and then ultimately to turn that pain around into purpose, to do something that would be redemptive and helping other people with their pain. So that is, you know, that's really what that's why I admire John. That's what we are all about. And I admire that you're having conversations about that kind of stuff here.
Yeah, absolutely. The similarities between your stories are all the way different. However, there's so many commonalities in what you talk about and things like that. Before you jump into your story, throw how old are you?
Yeah, I'm 38 years old. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. Have a wonderful wife, brilliant, gorgeous. We've been married for almost 7 years now. We have a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 4-year-old. So obviously, with those numbers, we have a unique story. You can tell we've been married for almost 7 years. We have a 10-year-old, 9-year-old, 4-year-old, and we blended our family. Um, and so part of the catalyst for the ministry that I lead called Nothing is Wasted, in fact, really the main catalyst was the tragedy I walked through in 2015 where I lost my wife and our unborn baby in a home invasion, We were pastoring, we had planted a church in Indianapolis, and I left to go to the gym early one morning. It was a random Tuesday morning, should have been a normal Tuesday morning on November 10th, 2015. And there were three guys who were on a crime spree in our city. And they broke into the house three doors down from us, saw me leave for the gym that morning, and decided to break into our home too. And my wife, Amanda, who was pregnant with our second, and our 15-month-old Weston were at home. Weston was in his crib upstairs. He was untouched and unharmed the whole time, but Amanda was shot three times. And I came home to find her. And she was still uh, alive when I found her. She was breathing very laboriously, but she was unconscious. And so we got her to the hospital, and she was on life support for the next 24 hours, but she didn't make it. So on November 11th, 2015, my life turned completely upside down. Um, and in that moment, I was found myself a single dad pastoring the church that she and I had started, trying to figure out how to grieve the loss of my best friend, my ministry partner, the person I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, and then helping our congregation to heal and grieve from that as well. We had moved, Dan, from South Carolina in 2011. And interestingly enough, it was November 11th, 2011 that we packed a moving van up to move from South Carolina to leave really what was a dream job at a church down there to follow a call to plant a church. And it was 4 years to the day after that Amanda was killed, November 11th, 2015. So one of the biggest things that, even since then I've had to struggle with and reconcile is when you're in the center of God's will, when you're following after God's call, you would think, at least in our American mindset, that God's going to protect you, hedge you, protect your family, that that's the safest place to be is in the center of God's will. And I've found that it's not necessarily the safest place to be in the center of God's will, but it is the most fulfilling, and it's the most satisfying, and it's the most fruitful place to be. And part of when you walk through pain, you have to begin to reconcile how one is how is God a loving and good God when he allows these kinds of things to happen? And how can I still thrive and um and experience the devastating heartache and agony that I've experienced in this life? Those things seem at odds. However, um, we serve a God that takes those two things that seem at odds, and he threads that tension beautifully into incredible redemption stories. And he does what I call the greatest judo move of all time, where he takes the momentum of the enemy and turns it around on the enemy. He takes what the enemy has done in our lives. Jesus said, I've come to give you life and give it to the full. He said, but there is a very real enemy that comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so much of the pain that we experience in life is because of this real enemy that is out to thwart the plan that God has for our lives. And so much of the pain that we experience in life is because of sin, the original sin that took place with Adam and Eve, and it fractured the entire universe. And now we're caught up in the fallout of this fracturing. And the enemy wants us to partner with him to get stuck in our pain. And Jesus has a different plan. He has a redemptive plan to take, as Timothy Keller said, to give evil enough space in our lives that it ultimately terminates itself. It turns around on the enemy to defeat the enemy's work. And so, in the midst of this upending experience in my life, it took me a few years to begin to put the pieces back in my life, or more accurately stated, to partner with God to let him put the pieces back in my life. But what I began to realize, and looking back on it now, I realized that God's writing a beautiful story. And while I would have never asked for this to be my story, I'm not sure I would trade it, because of how the depth of relationship that I've experienced with God, and the beauty and the awe that I've seen of his handiwork in my life.
Mm, 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 mm. So I know a little bit about how you guys got to Indianapolis and how you guys picked the house
Mhm.
that you live in. And I know a little bit about how you met your wife. Tell us a little bit about how those different puzzle pieces connected together to get you to live in Indianapolis um
Yeah.
and maybe even transition over to you already spoiled the story that you've got a great new wife.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, Davey's kind of healed through his wife being murdered. But that the kind of puzzle pieces that fit together of that part of your life are just incredible to me.
Mm. Yeah, well, like I said, when we were on staff at that church in South Carolina, we thought we'd be there for the rest of our lives, and then God began to put a call. I can now look back on it. At first, it's like this holy discontent. It's something that it was like an unrest, and I couldn't get away from it, but it felt like God was calling us to something a lot bigger than ourselves, and feel like we were very comfortable. I mean, it was anytime you're in ministry, it's some level of hard, but we were in a very comfortable place in a really fast growing church, doing everything that we love in South Carolina. And the we prayed against that call for about 8 months, and then finally just opened our hands and said, Lord, whatever you're calling us to, we just want to be in the center of your will. And so that's when, and I could share story after story after story of how we feel like God spoke to us in that. I go back to Henry Blackerby's Experiencing God study, which is just a phenomenal study. I did that when I was in middle school, and it's always stuck with me on how God speaks to us. He speaks to us through the filtration system of first His Word, then the Holy Spirit, circumstances in our life, and other godly people who confirm what God is speaking to you. And so those four things in that order, God showed up in those 8 months to speak to us very clearly. Indianapolis is where you're supposed to go. And I'm so grateful for that now, because a lot of times when bad things happen, not if, but when bad things happen, when you're following after Jesus, the first thing you can do is question your call. And I don't question our call to Indianapolis. It was so abundantly clear, and we pressed in really, even when we felt, okay, we think this is what's happening. We put out a lot of Gideon fleeces, so to speak, to say, God, is this really what you're calling us to do? And He made it abundantly clear. So I've never questioned the call. Now I've had to question God's character in that call. I've had to wrestle with that and go, wait, how could you let this happen when you called us to this? But we can get to that in a little bit, how I've kind of begun to untangle some of that. But so we get on the ground there in Indianapolis, and we just knew that we were supposed to be there, that we weren't, this wasn't a temporary assignment. So we weren't renting. We were like, let's buy a house. And God gave us this number, we felt like, because we were in ministry. You don't get into ministry for the money. So there's like, I always say there's multiple levels of broke. There's like broke, college kid broke, church planter broke. And so we just felt this impression. Here's the top dollar that we're willing to spend for a house right now, not knowing how the church is going to get started, where our revenue was going to come from. So we put an offer in on that house. Now it was the very first house that we came to, by the way. And we went and looked at that house, and Amanda goes running around, and she comes back to me and she's like, this is our house. Like, I know this is our house. And I'm like, I don't know. I've watched Chip and Joanna before. We got to go look at some other houses. You don't buy the first house that you put an offer or that you see. And so we look at like 25 other houses. It's crazy how many more. We came back to that house on 2812 Sunnyfield Court. And Amanda's like, this is our house. You should have listened to me the first time. It would have saved us a lot of time, and so we put an offer in on that house, but it was a lowball offer. They laughed us off the negotiating table. And we went back that night after meeting with our realtor, and we were staying with her grandmother in a suburb of Indianapolis. And her grandmother said, faith is living without scheming. It's trusting God and what you know that He has told you. And so we felt like God said, put the same offer in the next day. So we went back and we put the same offer in, and they accepted that offer. And then that house became our house. And it was incredible. It was a house full of so many great memories. We started our church there. We started with 4 people in our living room, and I preached a message called Invite because we only had four
Imagine
people.
that.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and the next week, guess what? We had 4 people, the same 4 people. So I scrapped the message I had planned, preached a message called Invite Harder. But we started to grow slowly but surely. And I'll never forget starting our kids ministry back in our master bedroom and putting VeggieTales on for the kids. And we'd crawl into bed at night. There'd be goldfish cracker crumbs, in our sheets. And It just felt like, when scripture says, don't despise the days of new beginnings, or small beginnings. There were times where we're like, oh, God, come on, this isn't going as fast as we wanted to. It's not growing as fast. But I look back on it now fondly, and life was so uncomplicated back then. And I wish I had appreciated the season and the journey that we were in at that time. Um, the first people that gave their life to Christ in our church gave their life to Christ in that living room. We brought Weston when we started, growing our family, and we had Weston in 2014. We brought him home to that living room, and that house was just a very sweet house, full of so many sweet memories. But it also is the same living room, same house that I walked into my greatest nightmare on November 10th, 2015, and Amanda lying on our living room floor, face down, surrounded by blood. And that it was just such a traumatic moment right there. And later on in my story, um, after everything, after we realized that she wasn't going to make it, and after some of the immediate aftermath of just getting over the shock and starting to sort through some of these painful emotions and the devastating loss, I found that I had to face and confront that house, because for the next 3 months, the enemy was using that house as a traumatic trigger for me.
Can you back up just a second? And this one's kind of a could be a triggering question, but we've talked
That's
about.
okay. I talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
this
yeah,
all the
yeah,
time.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
and I'll say this, Dan, triggers, I believe wholeheartedly, and what we teach people is that triggers, yes, they do exist, because trauma is real and trauma is embedded in our body, and we respond in ways sometimes our cognitive brain doesn't understand how we're responding. And so our body feels what we've experienced even before our brain can understand it. And that's what trauma does. And a lot of people look at triggers as the villain, and they say, "Oh, I don't want to experience that trigger." And so they avoid the things that actually are going to bring them healing. And triggers are, instead of being a villain in our story, triggers, we need to look at them as invitations from God to step into deeper healing. And mostly it's because people want to avoid the hard, the painful, and the difficult. And walking through triggers, facing triggers, is hard, it's painful, and it's difficult.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So, anyways, you continue your
We
question.
we had
Don't
another
don't
book
shy away
author
from
on
asking
named
anything triggering.
Amber
Yeah.
Leah, and she wrote a book called Triggers, and she's a
Mhm.
great guest and fantastic person. And um, yeah, often, thankfully, I learned that lesson a long time ago. And I'm like, I'm triggered by something,
Mhm.
emotion, and you got two choices. You can go towards it or go away from it. And when you
Exactly right.
recognize that, like you said, triggers an invitation for God for growth to learn something, to move through something. Um, I'm like, hey, there's something here. I don't know what it
Yep.
is. Let's figure it out.
That's
Um,
right.
so thank you for being just open and everything. I feel like some of the guys are sitting here listening, like, wait, he just said he went home and his wife, they're laying in blood. Like, it's almost sounded matter of fact, like, and I know you've
Yeah.
told the story
Right.
10,000 times by now.
Right.
Take us through that. Like, when I come home from the gym, I usually feel really good and I'm ready to get a
Yeah.
protein shake or
Yeah.
whatever. And did you have any inkling that there was anything different when you came home?
No, so every Tuesday morning, I have a conversation with a pastor friend of mine who pastors a church out in Delaware, and he had just planted his church at that time. And so, I called him actually while I was at the gym that morning, and I was finishing the conversation out in the driveway. Um, as I was talking to him and celebrating with him about the launch of their church and what God was doing in it, and the way that the way the events panned out that morning is um, it's very difficult sometimes to go back and look at them, because I look at it and I go, man, there's so many different things, that like little small things, that if it had altered, if this had happened differently, it would have altered the course of everything. And that can be a very difficult thing to wrestle through, because you start to ask, what if, what if, what if? But one of the things Amanda had told me in our Tuesday conversations is that if I'm still on the phone with my friend Kenneth, before, when I come home before 8 o'clock, if I would, she asked me, can you stay outside and continue the conversation out there? Because Amanda was so regimented with her time with the Lord. She would wake up. She was a very methodical, very regimented person, anyways, very routine. She would wake up at 7 o'clock every morning, and Weston would wake up at 8 o'clock every morning. And so from 7 to 8, Amanda was like, "This is my time." She was a stay-at-home mom. She was like, "This is my time to spend with the Lord. So don't come in." I had on a couple of occasions come into the house and woke Weston up prematurely just by talking loud, and stuff, just getting caught up in the conversation. And so that morning I stayed out in the driveway. I'm finishing the conversation, and there's a window in our at the house we lived at. There's a window on the door where I could just, if I looked through the window enough, it's a little tiny window, I could see Weston's room upstairs because the stairs would go straight from the door leading up to and I could see if his door was open. So we get to like 5 till 8, door's still closed. I'm like, okay, can't go in. I'm still on the phone. We get to 8 o'clock, door's still closed, still on the phone at 8:10 ish, and his door's still closed. So I finally wrap up the conversation with Kenneth a little bit after 8:10, and I'm like, I just need to get started with my day. And I open the door and I walk in and I see her. And at first, so Amanda was also very she had gotten some dizzy spells during the pregnancy already. And so at first, when I saw her, I thought that she had just gotten dizzy, maybe fallen, passed out, or something like that. So I call her name and she doesn't respond. I call her name, she doesn't respond. And then I run to her side. And as I'm running to her side, I notice all of these things. I notice the blood. Um, I notice that she's unclothed. She doesn't have clothes on. She's got her shirt had actually been pulled over top of her head. Um, I noticed there were things all strewn out all over the living room floor. Um, and so, and I noticed that she was breathing. She was lying face down. So I am over and over and over just saying this: Jesus, no, Jesus, no, Jesus, no, Jesus, no. It's like the first thing that, and the only thing that was coming out of my mouth. And I'm going, Amanda, are you there? Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? And so I turn her over and I notice that her breathing gets very laborious. And again, I notice that she's unconscious. And so I kind of have that panic moment where because they always say, don't mess with somebody if they're injured. So I'm like, oh no, did I do something? So my brain's moving 100 miles an hour
Mm-hmm.
and everything's moving it's in slow motion all at the same time. And so I grabbed my phone to call the paramedics, but because I had turned her over, there was blood all over my hands. And so I couldn't get my phone to swipe up the touch screen on it. So I'm frantically trying to call the paramedics. I finally get it to swipe up and I call the paramedics. It felt like it took 3 hours for them to get there. It only took 3 minutes.
Mm.
And the whole time I'm there, my brain's taking snapshots of all these things around the room that are just doesn't make, there's a lamp that's down, knocked over. So my brain was confused. I was confused because there was no construct for like, oh, someone has broken into our home. And so it couldn't reconcile what was happening. All I could think of was she had gotten out of the shower or something. She had gotten dizzy. She fell. There was a ladder that she had used as a decorative piece that had fallen down. So maybe she hit that as she was falling. The ladder fell on her. That's the reason for like the gash in her head, And so that's all I'm thinking right now is like, if we just get her to the hospital, everything's going to be okay. And that was mixed in with this false theology that I had as well that says as long as we're following after God, everything's going to be fine for our family. We may go through difficult, but God's going to protect my family. So all of these things are converging at the same time, and it doesn't make a single bit of sense. In fact, I have zero construct for someone who's broken into our home, which sounds very strange, I know, because she had 3 bullet wounds, but my brain was telling me all these other things at that moment until we got to the hospital. And I'm sitting in the waiting room, and doctors and investigators come and they begin to ask very probing questions to me.
Mm.
And when they realize that I just have no idea what's happened, they tell me, Davey, she's got 3 bullet wounds, and one is in the back of her head. And right now we're basically keeping her alive with machines, and we're just going to monitor to see if the swelling in her brain will go down. And I know it can sound, when I share this stuff, it can sound matter of fact. I've shared it a whole lot And part of that is because I've had to do a whole lot of work to do that cognitive behavioral therapy, to express those things and talk about those things. So I've shared them from stages, I've shared them from to my counselor initially over and
Mhm.
over and over. And what that does is it starts to take the power away from that. These kinds of triggering things will hold power over you and it will haunt you unless you begin to talk through them and unless you begin to form what therapists will say is your trauma narrative, unless you begin to put the pieces of the story together and talk about that story. And so, early on, I'm pastoring and I'm preaching and I'm talking about this, and other people are asking me to come share these things. And in the grace of God, he he led me through this major journey of cognitive behavioral therapy where I'm having to talk about it a lot. But the other reason it can be very difficult to talk about is because those kinds of situations are extremely difficult to talk about. And we can begin to try to mitigate the pain that we feel by talking about them. And in some ways, you can find yourself disassociating a little bit. And so that is, that every time I talk about this, it's actually like to me, it feels like it's one, like I said, it's an invitation from God. And it's something that I have to, every time I've got to overcome this fleshly internal desire to suppress this and to disassociate from this and not think about it. And every time I do, and this is what, when you start to, it's kind of like exposure therapy. When you start to um, confront your triggers, you feel a little bit more healing, a little bit more healing. And those things don't haunt you anymore. And then you pair that with, over time, as you see God heal and restore and begin to bring hope back into your life, you can begin to see that there is beauty that comes from ashes. And so the way I describe it, oftentimes the way I describe it in my book, is that what started out as a really deep flesh wound in my heart, that anytime you touched it, it was like, like, and it would literally paralyze me to think about, now is a scar. And a scar doesn't hurt as much, or, sometimes it doesn't hurt at all when you touch it, but it tells a story. And you can still experience some of the like emotional pain sometimes when you tell the story of how you got that scar, but it doesn't haunt you anymore. It doesn't overtake you anymore.
Yeah, I forgot who said it, but I got a military guy says, I don't want to go to war with somebody that doesn't have a limp.
Yeah.
I don't want to go
Yeah.
to battle with somebody that doesn't have a scar.
Hmm.
So that makes a bunch of sense.
Hmm. So, yeah. So, I mean, we can talk about all kinds of like what happened from there. But yes, I have remarried. I remarried in at the end of 2017, and it was the I knew, so the Lord took me on an incredible healing journey in 2016. I had no idea. There was no manual for how to heal from this. So I just said, God, whatever, I'll say yes to everything. You just lead me. Isaiah 30 says, though he give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, the teacher will hide himself no more. He will be like a voice whispering to you, this is the way, walk in it. And that's what it felt like for me in 2016, that he was a voice going, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this. And he did it with all kinds of different things, different pastors and counselors saying, hey, come visit me for a little bit. I mean, the Big C church, because our story was a big story, it was a national news story. The Big C church just rallied around me. And I'm so grateful for that. And now the reason that we have the ministry that we do have is because as I began to get my quote unquote legs back under me and started to minister to other people, I realized that most people don't have the resources or the rallying around that I had. And so I felt like what God told me is that, hey, you're supposed to build the platform or build the ministry that is that for other people. To whom much is given, much is required. And so in 2016, I just knew a couple of things. I knew God was going to have to lead me on this healing journey. There's no manual for this. And I also knew that to honor Amanda, I was 30 years old at the time. So there were so many people who were going, and they'll say things, it's funny how people will say things that they're well intentioned, but they're really not the right things to say. But there are a lot of people who are like, well, at least you're young. You'll find someone new again. I'm like, that doesn't help me at all. Like, I just lost my best friend. I lost the person I thought I would grow old with. Like, there's nobody out there that's going to compare to her. How in the world could you even say that to me? I can't even fathom remarrying. And so, but it was through that healing journey in 2016, I started to go, okay, Lord, I know that marriage is a beautiful thing. I know that my story's not over. I know Weston needs a mom. And so if you ever would bring me another wife, would you make sure that she loves you more than she loves me? Because that was probably the quintessential character trait of Amanda that drew me to her, was that she was passionately and madly in love with Jesus. Interestingly enough, when we were dating long distance, she gave me up for Lent one time because she just felt like the only thing that would feel sacrificial to her was to give me up. And as we were dating, I'm like, wait a minute, is that like the new Christian way of breaking up? Like, it's not you, it's me, like I got to give you up for Lent. But what that showed me that she, no matter what, she was going to be obedient to God, and that she loved Jesus more than she loved anything or anyone else in this world. And that was true of her for her whole life. I've had the privilege of reading her journals. And it's just incredible to see her heart for the Lord and how she would pour her heart out to the Lord. And so I wanted to make sure that if God were to bring me a new wife, that she would love Jesus more than she loves me, that she would love me, because that would be nice as well, that she would love Weston as if Weston were her own, and that she would love Amanda, my late wife, because I knew that this critical inflection point in my life was taking me on a new trajectory, that the ministry that was going to come out of my life, God called me to ministry was when I was 18, but then at 30, there was a massive transition of the ministry that God was calling me to, I could tell. And it was so much was going to be wrapped around the story of what had just happened. And so I knew I needed somebody who was willing to, if I'm going to speak somewhere else, who was so secure in her relationship with Jesus and her own unique and distinct identity that she could sit on the front row and celebrate what God was doing through Amanda's legacy, and be confident in what the unique assignment and calling that God had for her. So I knew that was a very almost impossible thing. So I just prayed, Lord, first of all, I don't think that that's going to happen. So I settled, if I'm going to be single for the rest of my life, that's the case. But if you have somebody, then would you bring her? And shortly after that, I had this conversation with a girl who had been coming to my church for a couple of months. She was a single mom, and I was intrigued by her. I couldn't get her off my mind. I didn't know why. And I'd met her in a CrossFit gym. A bunch of the folks in our CrossFit gym were coming to the church that I was pastoring at the time. It was a really strong, really cool community of people. And so she had started coming, and she avoided me like the plague. It was really strange. I couldn't figure out how to get a conversation with her at all. And she was also serving in our inner city ministry. We had started a ministry in a neighborhood that was 40% vacancy, high crime rate, like 16 murders in 1 month. But our effort was to intercept kids and teenagers before they stepped into a life of crime related, drug related activity because of what had happened to Amanda. So we were trying to turn what had taken place in our family's life and help our city to really mitigate the crime that was taking place there. And so our church was serving there. She was serving in that. So I end up the week that I was supposed to turn my manuscript in to our publishers. This was the beginning of 2017. And I'm asking God, what is the redemption in my story? Like, I know you brought me through an incredible healing over this past year. And I had chronicled all that God did in that book. But I'm like, there's got to be something else. Like, I'm telling people that nothing is wasted. I'm telling people that you redeem stories, but I'm just believing it now. I'm not seeing it. Incidentally, I get done with like a 8 hour writing session. I go to the gym after hours, and the last class is coming out, and it's her. She's walks out of that last class, and I'm like, this is my moment. Like, I'm gonna. And so I cornered her very pastorally. Um, I said, "Hey, what's your Jesus story? You've been coming to my church for like 3 months, and I have no idea anything about you. And it felt so awkward. I was like just fumbling. I had not, I mean, I'm like, man, I'm way out of practice in this. And I'm a pastor and our story's really big. And I don't really know how to do this and be subtle, but also indiscreet, but also like show someone I have interest in them. And, it just felt really awkward. It was a very weird season. And um, she begins to tell me her story. And all I honed in on, she tells me now that she was trying to tell me the ugly of her story because she was trying to like not have anything to do with me. But all I honed in on was that she had done about 4 years of missions work after college. I'm like, oh, you're passionate about ministry. Okay. I'm like checking the boxes over
Yeah.
here. And I said, is that why you're serving in our inner city ministry? She said, well, actually, my parents live in that neighborhood. They just feel like that's part of their ministry. I was like, wow, man, on intentionally, that's incredible. It's a very dangerous neighborhood. Good for them. I said, well, the reason we started that ministry is because of Amanda's story. She said, yeah, I'm probably more familiar with Amanda's story than what you would feel comfortable with. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, Davey, my stepdad, that one that lives in that neighborhood, my mom, he is one of the chaplains for our prison system. And he's been assigned to the three guys that killed your wife. He visits them every week and shares the gospel with them. And I was blown away. Like there was so much that was going through my mind all in that moment. Like, see, one of the things that had been so impactful for me growing up, and then even in my relationship with Amanda, was the story of Jim and Elizabeth Elliott, which I'm not even sure why this started to become something that I was so intrigued by. But, they were missionaries in South America, and Jim was murdered along with all the other men in that missionary team. They were murdered by an unreached people group. And Elizabeth, um, she came back to the States for a little bit, and as she was healing through it, she felt like God had called her to go back to that same tribe, that group that murdered her husband, and share the gospel with them. And she did. And as a result of that, that entire unreached people group became believers. They were so touched by her demonstration of radical forgiveness and grace. And so, for whatever reason, that story has just really stuck out to me. And now I can see why that God really was honing my heart into a story that he was going to be leading me into as well. And so in that moment when she tells me that, I'm like, God, you're up to something here. So I didn't say anything profound there. I just said, do you want to go grab some dinner? And that started a journey where for the next couple of months, she still denied me any kind of time I was asking her out. But after a little while, I finally convinced her to go out on a date with me. And I was really just trying to get to the bottom of what God was doing. And it turns out that God had it fit that she and I were going to form affections for each other and fall in love. And the end of 2017, we got married. We blended our family. Her daughter from her previous marriage, her name's Natalia. She's now 10. And then my son, Weston, from my previous marriage. And now we have a 4-year-old together. His name's Cohen.
Fantastic. One, thank you so much for sharing like the crazy details and the exact thoughts and things that you had as you went
Yeah.
through that. And I can only imagine my feelings if I would have found out that my future father-in-law was
Yeah.
in a pastoral role with the three guys that killed my ex or deceased wife.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
like, ah, get me out of here! Like,
Yeah. I know.
I can't handle this.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, here's the thing.
And at the same time, get me out of here! I can't handle this. However, bring me right back. Like,
Yeah, that's the thing.
like,
It's like you know that God, and here's the thing with all of our stories. What I've come to realize is that we can either take our stories and our lives into our own hands, but there's so much um there's so much peril with that. I mean, scripture says there's a way that seems right to man, but in the end it leads to death. It also says man plans his ways, but God establishes his steps. So we have and this is something we fight in our flesh all the time. It's like, let me take control, let me steer it, or we can say, God, you have control. I'm just going to follow after you. And part of healing and part of coming into the fullness of what God has for us is surrendering to the plan he has for us. And it never looks appealing or enticing because Jesus said that he called us as his disciples to take up our cross daily. So it's not like he didn't call us to take up our Tempur-Pedic mattress. He didn't call us to take up our massage chair. Like he said, take up your cross. So that means that God's going to lead us through really difficult things. But the cross is what led to the resurrection. And the portal that God has for us to experience resurrection, is always through suffering. Paul said it, right? He said, I want to share in the resurrections of Christ, but I also must share in his sufferings. And so we can go through life in this really mediocre, even as a believer, so to speak, we can go through life as this mediocre, somewhat, at least try to convince ourselves it's a charmed life, suburban, 2.4 kids with a picket fence, just kind of like try to hedge ourselves away from any discomfort or any pain. And truthfully, that life ends up being hollow, meaningless, and purposeless. And it still doesn't um, make you impervious to pain. There's still so much pain that happens in life. Or we can say, you know what, God, I don't know, I don't know what this plan is that you have for me. When Jesus calls the disciples, hey, we're going to go to the other side of the lake in Mark chapter 4. And they're like, whoa, we can't go to the other side of the lake. There's so many reasons we can't go to the other side of the lake. And sure enough, as they're going to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, they get caught in a storm. But at the end of the day, they got to experience the healing of a demon possessed man on the other side of it. That was a miracle. And then what that led to is reaching the Decapolis, which is hundreds, maybe thousands of people coming to know Christ because of it, right? So there is so much beautiful resurrection, hope, purpose on the other side of suffering, but we have to be willing to get in the boat with Jesus and go, God, I don't know what you have planned here, but whatever it is, I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to trust that your plan is good in my life. And I'm going to stop trying to take control. And I think that's such an important thing. That's why scripture says it's suffering that leads to perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. So the only way we experience hope in life is through suffering and what it does in us to grow us, to refine us, to forge a character inside of us. And so that's why I can say, I would have never asked for this story, but I also don't know if I would trade it in because of the way that God has forged my character through all of it. And the intimacy that I've experienced with God. I actually miss the first 6 months after Amanda passed. The intimacy I experienced with God, the nearness, the closeness that I experienced, I miss that. And it's like every morning I'm in the word going like, God, I want to experience that nearness with you. I just don't want to experience what I had to go through to experience,
100%.
you know what I mean? And unfortunately that's kind of one of the dilemmas of life. It's like we experience the nearness of God in the valley. It's amazing. Psalm 23 tells us every verse leading up to verse 4. Verse 4 says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will
Yeah.
fear no evil, for you are with me. It's interesting. It says, for you are with me, which is a second person. It's talking directly to God. But verse 1 through 3 talks about God in the third person. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in
Yes.
green pastures.
Yes.
So you've got the mountaintops, the green pastures where you know about God, but it's in the valleys that you get to know him personally. And so that's why when God's going, hey, here's the next assignment I have for you, it's not going to be easy, but you're going to need to confront these perpetrators. You're going to need to step into the story of forgiveness that I'm inviting you to.
Mm.
That's why I can go, okay, God, I don't know how you're going to do this, but I do know that you're going to empower me by the same spirit that you have raised me with. You're going to also empower me to walk in that kind of redemption, to become more like the person of Jesus.
So we have things that show up in our life. I had something maybe a month ago or so, and 2 months ago, whatever it was, and like, struggle, struggle, struggle.
Yeah.
And yeah, that closeness with Christ going through it. I'm like, man, I'm so glad you're here with me. And like,
Yeah.
we're super, super close. I was reading about a priest who was, I think the communists had him, and they're, just reading him the riot act. Or no, I'm
Mm,
sorry, they were super, super kind to him, and they were trying to get
hmm
him to turn on the United States.
mm,
And he just kept going along, and finally like, hey, you're going to have to sign this thing and this statement. And he's like, God, help me out here. Like I got problems. And
Mm.
then the guy, he's like, I can't do it.
Mm.
And then they're like, you know, we're killing all these other people. So, get in line. Like, we're just going to kill you.
Wow.
And he looks at him and he's like, just lost his will. He's
Mm.
starving, physically wasn't good. And he's grabs the pen and just signs it.
Oh,
And he
man.
looks up and he's so depressed that he, you know, renounced he believed in Jesus. Like,
Wow.
just, and he's like, God, how could that happen?
Wow.
And he's like, in his strength, he felt like
Yeah.
he could do it.
Yeah.
And over time, his learning was the fact that, he still had room to grow.
Mm.
As strong as he thought he was, in those circumstances, he was
Yeah.
weak.
Mm.
And through his weakness, he learned
Wow.
how strong he was and how strong Christ was and God was. And he healed
Wow.
himself from that. So, for a priest to ultimately renounce God
Yeah.
with a signed document,
Yep.
I'm like, that'd be pretty big. That's
Yeah.
a pretty traumatic event in life. And so big things can happen, and God can use those to draw us closer to Him and heal us and
Yeah.
allow us to really, really experience forgiveness. So, through your story, I've often thought, man, I'm just like you.
Mm-hmm.
All these
Mm.
other people will help. We'll pray for them. We'll be in community with them. And God, thanks for protecting me and my family and keeping us
Mm.
safe. And it's a great covenant, great deal that we
Right.
have.
Right.
Bad things happen to other people, and thanks for
Yeah.
keeping my little family sheltered.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when something super traumatic happens, it's like, wait, you broke the deal, God.
That's exactly right.
And that was
Yep.
never the deal.
That's right. Yep. He never said that. He never promised us that. Yeah. And that's what pain and trauma can end up. It can end up disorienting us because it deconstructs the construction of God that we had. Um, and so that what we do now as a ministry, years later, what's happened is I stepped away from pastoring and we started a ministry first spawning out of a podcast that we have called the Nothing is Wasted podcast. We started that in 2017. And we just
You've
interview
had you've had
people.
some fantastic guests on that as well.
We really have. God's been so gracious to us in that it's just been cool to interview people and talk to them about their stories and how God's shown up in their stories. And it over and over and over, we keep seeing Revelation 12 come true, where we could overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And it encourages so many people. But then as it started encouraging a lot of people, we started realizing we needed more than just inspiration to encourage. We needed a pathway of transformation for people. And so I stepped away from pastoring in 2019 and started figuring out what that looked like, started coaching people. And we ended up developing a framework, a curriculum called Pain to Purpose. And individuals can go through it as a self-directed study online, on our website, nothingiswasted.com. But mainly the way that gets implemented now is we partner with churches, and churches launch. We do it in churches, college campuses, and correctional facilities now, but they launch this curriculum to create environments where people can heal. So it's kind of like the Financial Peace University of Pain and Trauma. Churches will offer classes or do it in small groups, and they run it as a part of their discipleship programs to help people get off pain and trauma can tend to sideline people from missional work. And so God's plan for all of us is that we have an even like wider, hot mission coming out of that. And so we help people discover that so that they can be set back on mission in their local church and in their community.
Yeah, and you
Um,
speak all over the country. So, guys, if you've got a church or connected to a
yeah.
church or even a prison or what have you, connect with Davey and see if you can get him booked somewhere.
Yeah, I would love that, and we would love to just walk beside whatever your organization is to help you with that. That's our deepest heart. We also have 3 dozen coaches at this point. We're adding coaches every quarter too. We have 3 dozen coaches that we match people with one on one. At first, it started I was coaching people, and then I realized that wasn't scalable or sustainable. So we started certifying other coaches, and we certified them through our pain to purpose pathway, and they're trauma informed. Some of them are trauma certified. Some of them are even all the way to therapists. But we match people with similar pain points. So if someone comes to our ministry and maybe they've lost a child, we match them with a child loss coach.
Hmm.
Or if they've experienced some kind of sexual betrayal, we match them with a sexual betrayal coach. If they have an addiction, we match them with an addiction coach. So that's how we try to get people to walk. because we really, I found I needed somebody more specifically. I needed somebody who had walked through what I'd walked through.
Hmm.
The enemy tries to get you to think that nobody understands what you're going through.
Right.
One, we serve a high priest who has gone through everything we've gone through, and he can empathize with our plight, as scripture tells us. That's Jesus. But also, the power of technology allows us to cut through that lie from the enemy and go, hey, there are other people who have experienced a similar thing that you've experienced. First Peter 5, I think, is what it is. I think First Peter 5 tells us, let's not be mistaken. There are other saints all around the world who are suffering in the same way. And so I think it's important for people to know that so that the enemy can't isolate them and get them discouraged and defeated. So we really just try to help match people with that. So nothingiswasted.com is where all of our resources are, and we've got all kinds of courses on there. We've got all kinds of content, our podcast, great stuff to just get people started in the on the pathway of going from pain to purpose.
Mm. So a couple thoughts I've had related to my life is what we've been talking about. So you talk about discomfort. This morning I was out with a group of guys, a faith-based group called F3, and we did 200 yards of bear crawls, 200 yards of lunges, 250 sit-ups, and 400 Russian twists. We call them American hammers because we're not commies.
Yep.
So that was a lot of discomfort, and I was right there going with a guy who's 60 years old. I think he's actually 61, and I'll be darned if that guy could keep doing the sit-ups. And I'm like, man, my muscles just aren't. Well, the will is there, but the muscles like aren't firing at that
Yeah.
240th sit-up.
Yeah.
But yeah, he just kept cruising, and he's like, "Thanks for pushing me." I was like, "Dude, I wouldn't have without you next to me." So there's something to do hard, difficult things with other people and
Right.
invite them into community. And I was having coffee this morning with a guy that's got another book coming out called "The Spirit of Fatherhood,"
Mm.
and a great guy, a guy named Larry Hagner. And one of the things we were talking about was marriage, and we were talking about difficult things that we've had to go through in marriage. And one of them for me and my wife was uh, there's a big story behind it, but in vitro. And I was against it after doing some looking, and the doctor was actually wrong. It wouldn't solve the problem anyway.
Hmm.
We'd had some miscarriages and things, and I thought
Wow.
she's emotionally invested. A doctor told her this will work, and
Mm.
I'm drawing a line in the sand where this could be a divorce. Like this
Mm.
could be really bad. Thankfully, God stepped in and healed us. We've got two kids now, and
Oh, wow. Praise the
way
Lord.
better marriage and
Mm.
adversity going through that. So it's
Mm.
funny how you hear someone's story and you're like, oh yeah, like just going right through it. Yeah,
Right.
a
Right.
question for you: if you were to give advice to your kids about
Mm.
how to select a future spouse, like characteristics to
Mm.
look for, traits, have you had any thoughts about things like that?
Yeah. Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, I think the most important one I mentioned earlier, that
Yes.
your spouse is madly in love with Jesus. At the end of the day, uh, that covers a multitude of things, right? I mean, we are all people who are in progress. None of us are perfect. To expect your spouse to be perfect or to prop them up as your savior or the person who's going to fully and finally satisfy and fulfill you is setting you up for absolute disappointment and disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Because unlike Jerry Maguire would want to assert to us, there's nobody that can complete us. The one in our life is Jesus. And so you want your spouse to love Jesus. We used to always say, find someone who's running passionately and hard after Jesus. And after a while, look up and see if anybody else is running that fast and passionately. Or I'm sorry, you run passionately and hard after Jesus. Look up and see if there's anybody else running passionately hard after Jesus. If there's someone next to you doing the same thing, then that's a good indication that may be the person God has for you. Um, because you're going to grow in marriage and you're going to be sanctified through marriage and Jesus, and there's a lot of things that you're going to see in your spouse and vice versa that you can't fix. You can't be the Holy Spirit for them. So you need to rely on the Holy Spirit to be the Holy Spirit for them. And so, I would say that. And I would say, with that, it's going to come all these other character traits. Then you're going to have love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self control is the fruit of the Spirit. And so, really, if I'll just boil it down, that's what you need to look for. Beauty is fleeting, charm is deceptive. You know it. But at the end of the day, you want to find somebody who really loves the Lord.
That's fantastic. And you've got kids in the same age range I have. If you were to give them some life advice, what are some nuggets that you'd throw to them that you'd hope they'd
Mm,
receive?
yeah. Well, we try to walk our kids through virtues. There's seven deadly sins we taught,
Hmm.
and then there's seven, virtues that kind of correspond with that. So Christy and I look at the virtue that we feel like each of our kids really need to hone in on for a year. And so we kind of run through that rubric a lot, and um, I think the first advice that I would give our kids is that life life is going to be hard, but in Christ you can do hard things. I think a lot of times kids think that life's supposed to be easy, and parents try to rescue them from
Hmm.
hard things, and they further exacerbate the issue with kids that they can't hold up to the hard things. Um, there's that book, The Coddling of the American Mind. I think we're just seeing that a lot right now. So we want our kids to know they can do hard things by the power of Jesus. And I think the other thing is that we would teach them certain virtues lessons, that things like, hey, we are a family that stewards what God puts in our hands. So we make sure that we leave things better than what we found them, that we're a part of the redemptive process that God has for this world. And so we partner with him in making everything around us better, that we're diligent, that we're humble, that we're honest, that we're hard workers, that we give grace, that we um, are patient. I think all of those kinds of things that we're really trying to hone in with our kids quite a bit. That we care about others more than we care for ourselves. That we are um, a self-sacrificing kind of family, not a self-preservation kind of family.
That's fantastic. I'm writing a chapter of a book today on a deadline. So
Nice. That's awesome.
appreciate your help
That's
refining the
awesome.
chapter. That's great.
That's
Um,
awesome.
anything you want to share with the audience? Any tidbits, anything about how to be a better dad or better husband, or just anything to be a
Oh
better
man. Well, I
better
think,
man here on earth? And you
yeah, I
know,
just think that, this is, I mean, there's so many like tips and tricks and life hacks and
yeah,
all that kind of stuff. I think the biggest thing I want people to really take away from this is that the way that we're a better dad, the way that we're a better husband, is that we become a better follower of Jesus. That he's the one that really changes our heart to help us in each one of those spaces. Um, I find that the more that I lean into the Lord and spend time with him, the more attuned I am to my kids, the more present I am with them, the more attuned I am with my wife. That the Lord really helps me. He is our help. He is Jehovah Azer, is what God as our help is. And if I try to do it on my own in my own self-sufficiency, man, I mess it up so much. I'm constantly breaking things around me if I do it on my own. So I think that's the biggest thing. And there's all kinds of different situations people are in: blended families, broken families, dysfunctional families, trauma-filled families, all that kind of stuff. We've got a lot of resources on our website that really help people with different nuances of stuff, and things to think through as you're walking in that, especially trying to be a better husband, better dad in the midst of pain and trauma. But I think that's the biggest, that if I were to start any kind of talk, I'd say first, just follow after Jesus. Be a better follower of Jesus. He's the best husband, the best dad there is. So emulate him.
yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Your book's coming out. Guys can jump on your launch team. Information's on your
That's right.
website right now, nothingiswasted.com.
Yep.
And then down the road, we're going to do a Q&A that we talked about.
Yeah.
So, guys listening, be on alert for an invite down the road for a Q&A. We'll
Yeah.
put together a group. I can't wait to do that. Um, anything else that we should cover? And then
Man,
I
I
got,
appreciate it. No, we've got if somebody wants to just kind of get started on a journey, get connected with
oh
us,
yeah,
we've
you
got
got
a
you got a text thing.
7 days of, yeah,
Yeah.
7 days of devotions we'll send to your inbox. If you the text the letters NIW, as in nothing is wasted, NIW, to the number 66866. then
66866.
correct. Yep. And it'll prompt you, hey, what's your email address? And then we'll start sending you 7 days of devotionals. It's actually like a precursor to a 42-day devotional that I wrote that's on our website. And then, yeah, nothingiswasted.com. You can go to nothingiswastedbook.com if you want to go directly to the book stuff, the book that's releasing in July 30th. Nothing is Wasted. I would love for you to pre-order it. Love for you to join the launch team if you want to be a part of helping us get the word out there. That'd be great. That'd be really great.
Can you throw a challenge? I didn't prep you for this. Out to the guys, something they can do week to week in between this episode and next episode that will help them be a better dad, husband,
Mm.
person in life, leader, whatever that might
Well,
be.
here's a big challenge. Okay. We talked about this earlier to confront your triggers. I want to challenge you to find what is one thing that is causing you emotional dysregulation, that causes you to feel something in your body that is like, whoa, this dysregulates me. Call that a trigger. Find a trigger, and I want you to lean into that trigger. Go confront it. So we call it run toward the roar. So for me, again, the house was a triggering thing. I knew I needed to go back to the house and let God meet me there and just let him minister to me there. So I think that there are things that we are as dads and as husbands that we are carrying, emotional baggage that we're carrying that we've just suppressed because our mindset as men has been, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and just get over it, like rub some dirt on it. And I'm not saying we don't need to be tough, but I think what happens in that philosophy is that our heart becomes really tough and calloused, and our skin becomes, so to speak, or metaphorically, our outside becomes tender. So we end up being moody, agitated, grumpy, resentful, frustrated, angry. And so anything that touches us or that wound, we get really agitated. And then our heart is too callous to be able to be broken through and become soft again. And what I want to challenge you to do is that if you find those triggers, lean into those triggers, confront those triggers, because what it will do is it will begin to flip that. Your skin will become tough. You don't take things as personally anymore. You have a lot more grace for other people, and your heart becomes soft. That's what a godly man looks like. Tough skin, soft heart.
That's fantastic. I love that one. So, could be something from your childhood, could be something traumatic in your adulthood, could be, um, maybe something in your family. Like your kids say
Yep.
something, and next thing you know, you're flipping out on them, or your wife says something, you're flipping out on them, or uh, whatever it is. But you know what it is in your life where you're like, dang it, that thing happened again, and I got mad and angry about it. And
Mm-hmm.
it keeps coming
Yep.
back up. So it could be big, could be small, but that's a fantastic challenge, and it's well worth becoming a better person so
Right.
that you're a better husband, better friend, better person, better coworker, better boss, all that type
Yep.
stuff. Because wherever it is in life, it's going to bleed over into the other aspects of your life as well.
Yep. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Dan, this has been awesome, man. Thank you so much.
You bet. I appreciate it. Glad we were finally able to connect and get this one rolling.
I
So
know, me too. It's been a journey, hasn't it?
absolutely, it has. Absolutely, it has. Well, God bless you. And guys, come back again next week. Share the podcast, share Davey's story with others and his website, and invite them to join the launch team too. It's pretty exciting when we have opportunity before a book comes
Mm,
aboard to join and partner and help other people and spread the word.
yeah. Thanks, Dan.
You bet. Absolutely. Thanks, Davey. Bye bye.